Hello everybody. May this video bring happiness and joy to all who partake in watching it and understanding its deeper meaning. Today I would like to explain why I got this gorgeous rose quartz. Because it makes me feel like I'm holding a big giant heart. And when I hold it, I imagine that I'm channeling the love song of the universe through my hand. So that's why I got it. And today I would like to talk about gravity. And everybody seems to always say on the YouTube videos that nobody knows what it is. So I thought, okay, well, I'll tell you what it is. And I promise that if you know what flowing water looks like, then you'll be able to understand this. Since the universe is made out of a fluid, like water, it's just really and truly, the universe is like a fluid of water. The only difference, which is a big difference, is that before the universe was born, that water was just zero viscosity and zero density. It's kind of like it was invisible, but it was still there. But, mathematically, it was a fluid that existed. So if you just pretend like, okay, we can't prove anything, but we can talk about things with our mouth and convince each other. So let's just say that I am going to invent a universe made out of zero viscosity fluid and zero density fluid. And what would happen, given our current understanding of energy, preservation of energy? What would happen if, like God clapped his hands, or, a mosquito just suddenly appeared there, and just a little bit of it wiggled? What would happen? So everything would go real turbulent, and everything would flow in a natural curved pathway, and it just turns out that everything flows inward, like a tornado is an inward flow. And when you have water, and somehow there's conditions right to make a tornado, because the wiggles around it are just such that it forms that tornado, it turns out that that tornado, in order for it to form, it sucks in its neighboring whatever's there, and it flows in that natural pattern. And so when it flows in that pattern, we look at it and we go, oh, that's a tornado, and it has an identity. But it's really just the fluid moving in the way that it wants to move. And there's a reason it does that, because if you have two things moving, and one's moving faster than the other, it's going to cause the stuff in the middle to sort of curl. That's just one example of how things just move in a logical progression. So you have all these little bitty wiggles being formed, and some of them aren't perfect, and so they don't turn into permanent tornadoes, which we call photons. They don't turn into those. In fact, most of them don't. But the ones that are like the perfect song, it's like perfectly geometric. It has the golden spiral ratio of wiggles. If each one of these is 1 over 1.6 times the diameter of the one above it, then that's like, it'll just keep going forever and ever smaller and smaller. And that's a photon. As an example. So we've got all these little wiggles, and between the wiggles is that nothingness stuff, that's the zero viscosity stuff. But now that we're starting to have movement, we start having viscosity. Why, you ask? Well, because if this is moving in the zero viscosity fluid, what it actually is happening, I'll just tell you a little bit more, that it's actually accelerating. It's not just having a velocity. Because the only meaningful thing for a zero viscosity fluid is that it accelerates. Then it actually does something. Because if it just goes a certain velocity, it might as well not be moving at all, in a way. So I'm just saying that in this universe I'm inventing, all of these wiggles have as an equation that it's streamline follows the golden spiral, and this expands at, well, to you and me it's the speed of light, but there's a reason that it goes that fast. And it has to do with the local wiggles, and if it's real dense, full of wiggles, and it's going through a plasma, it'll go a little bit slower. And So we want to understand, though, what gravity is. So in a way, these are the very first gravitational beings, these little wiggles, because like I said, the natural movement of these wiggles is such that it sucks in the ether around it. And that ether, by the way, is the fluid that has the viscosity equals 0, density equals 0, and right when God claps his hand or the mosquito appears, I should say something more exciting than a mosquito, the Shiva appears, yeah. Brahman goes, and Shiva appears. And so it's shaped like the wiggles. And in order to do that, it makes the ether from around it go inward, and it accelerates. And each point in space equals x, y, z. Each point in space has a vector associated with it. So at x, y, z, the acceleration of the fluid is a of x, y, z. And what a is that tells you what that particle is doing at that moment. What's its acceleration? And you could also say, well, it has a history. So this is philosophy. Okay, this is philosophy. But I'm using math to talk about philosophy because it's more accurate than language. I mean, well, it is language. Okay, so we've got all these little wiggles, and although also there's smaller wiggles that are like 10 to the minus 42 smaller than this, and any ratio, you can pick any ratio you want. And then there's some that are a whole bunch bigger, and they go infinitely big, infinitely small. The ones that are infinitely big might actually, their flow pattern might sort of look like our galaxy, because it'll be like this but very big. And it'll suck in all the space around it, just like the little wiggles suck in space around them. And our galaxy, has that spiral shape. I wonder if our galaxy is a permanent photon with stability, or if it's just an infinitesimal wiggle in the eternity of unfathomableness, and that it'll fizzle out one day. But if it does, that's okay, because our energy will go back into the cosmic soup of the wiggles out here. We'll still be part of these wiggles, and we might team up with some buddies and make a low entropy system over here, and experience a lot of bliss, which is the purpose of life, in my opinion. So that's why this theory is very beautiful, and it's almost weird calling it a theory, because it's just the way it is. It's not a theory, it's the way, well, I guess I would say it's my reality. This is how I see the universe. And it's kind of like just as practical and matter of fact as this is how I see the ocean and how it flows. I sort of have a model in my mind of how the ocean flows. Why? Because I observed it, and I see how fluids flow, and I understand why they do what they do. And the same with smaller. You just, in your mind, you just change the viscosity to 0. You take the limit as the viscosity goes to 0, and what are those flow patterns? And it turns out they're very, very tight curls everywhere at all size scales. And pretty soon, after enough exchanges of energy go by, I guess the initial note of the song is the logos of the universe, because that initial note determines what the majority of the harmonics are going to be, like what's going to be that bass note. Well, there's not really a bass note, because it goes down to infinite lowness, But let's just say for wherever you are, the lowest one your senses can pick up. You can call that the tonic of the universe. And by tonic, that's a musical term for the bass note, like the bass note of a chord, the one that you always come back to in the end, and sort of that final sound that all the waves build. Like if this is a sine wave, and that's the bass note, then all the next notes that build onto that will be, their half wavelengths will be times n, of this big wavelength. And this is the tonic wavelength. Okay? So like for Earth, we might say, maybe our tonic wavelength here on Earth is the Schumann resonance 7.83, because that's the frequency that the Earth's surface kind of resonates at, and then our bodies resonate at that frequency. If things are going well, we resonate at that frequency. That's what the astronauts wear on their belt, a little generator at this frequency, so that they can resonate with it and stay alive. And their cells resonate with it. It's like food for it kind of keeps the wiggles moving like in a nice pattern, like the battery for the watch. Because if you don't have this, then it's kind of like the battery for the watch goes away. And the watch may tick for a while and might have some momentum, just keep ticking for another week, but eventually it's just going to, the last straw, that's it, it's out of power. And so you want to keep that charged with wiggle energy, And if everything's tuned together, then you don't need much energy to keep it going. You might just hit your sonic, whatever, your tuning fork. You might just hit that, on your skin, like, see, I should hit this. Yeah, so it's wiggling now, and then you would just put that on your body whenever you feel like you need it, and then it sort of just calms your body down and gets you into that beautiful ocean feeling of tranquil waves like this, to where you are chill, and in that way there's no chaotic sounds going on in your cells in terms of sound waves or light waves, I guess, or electromagnetic field pulses in your neurons, and that would make you feel at ease when you're at your tonic, this is the Earthling. And I always thought if someone came from another galaxy that was made with a different initial note in the Big Bang, when the first little wiggles were formed, would they be at a different frequency, and would their etheric fluid, when it interacted with ours, would it suck ours, or would we hurt theirs, or would they hurt each other's? They certainly wouldn't probably support each other's, but because they wouldn't be in the same frequency. Like, say, if they were a prime number multiple or whatever. So I think now that I've kind of talked about what the initial form of gravity was when the universe was created and the first wiggles were formed that sucked in ether in an accelerated manner. Inward. Well, actually, I should have drawn it. Here, I'll do this. See, it sucks it in like that. And this is just, those are the devils. They're doing the opposite. Okay. But anyway, this is kind of the direction of the ether going into the curvy whorl. I call it a whorl. W-H-O-R-L. And that is the first unit of gravity. If you could possibly imagine the limit as the size of the smallest particle goes to zero. The limit that the smallest particle goes to zero. And by the way, when you have a universe or any volume containing sort of an average particle size distribution, so maybe the average is right here, our average, then that would be the local fairy dust. Those particles, and you're just assuming there's not going to be anything real big there at that local area. So those are just all the little wiggles that are just like so tiny and interacting at all size scales. And some of them are permanent, and they might escape the box because they're photons and they have momentum, But some other ones just come in and out of existence, and they sort of suck in the ether as they go into little spirals, and then when they come out of the spiral, they sort of putter out and don't do anything. Maybe they generate a little heat, which jiggles the other ones around. So the fairy dust is such that as the radius of the particle, or the radius of the wiggle, okay? The radius of the wiggle approaches zero, and as that happens, that we call that fairy dust. So that we're imagining in our mind these little twinkling pieces of glitter so that we can kind of imagine the direction of the fluid flow and how much it's accelerating. Because if you have a big acceleration arrow, then you'll have little specks of glitter going quite quickly along that, and faster and faster and faster wherever they may end up going, because that's what acceleration does. And this is no different than Einstein's experiment, where he's on the bottom of a rocket out in space, and here's Earth. Okay, so he's going up, and it's holding him on the ground, and he's so proud. He's so proud because, you know, it's going exactly G. That means the acceleration matches that of Earth. Now, so he's moving, so he has if you take a moving reference system, here it is, the reference system moves with the rocket, then space is accelerating over the rocket and pushing him down. And that's the same as standing on Earth and having space push you down. Now, why does that space just rush into the Earth like that at an accelerated rate? What's going on? Why would it do that? Well, think if the Earth is a bunch of little particles that are made out of smaller and made out of smaller all the way down to R approaches 0, including the fairy dust, and the fairy dust is all moving in these little tiny circles at all size scales. That's a lot of little gyroscopes with inertia that you're adding up from size equals 0 all the way to your current size scale. That's a lot of inertia. That's where inertia comes from. The summing up of the curls of all the flows of the zero fluid that has infinite turbulence in there. And by the way, if you take zero viscosity and you multiply it by infinite acceleration, you actually get a finite number, which gives it that inertia. So that's the inertia, and there's so much little curls going around sucking in ether that the summation of that, where is it going to come from? It comes from out here. It turns out that that is, you know, the equation is acceleration equals, and then it's the acceleration g of ours. This acceleration equals g is the same as this acceleration. This has a stationary coordinate origin, and this has a moving one, and it accelerates with the rocket. So now we know what gravity is. It's just ether, either accelerating and holding you down onto a surface, or accelerating and holding you down on a surface. That's always what it is. Or it might be accelerating into a whirl or a photon vortex, sucking gravity into that. And that gravity is sort of, that pulling in thing is sort of spread out as it goes by. It's sort of spread out. So you don't really notice it. Like you think you felt something, but no, it's gone. It must have been my imagination because it goes by so quickly. But if you have a photon that's trapped in a circle, if you check my other videos about that, you can, it kind of flows like, and this is just one single streamline, like that, in a circle. So it has this twisting motion going around, and then it has the going around, but then inside that it has all that fairy dust with its twisting motion going in its ways. So each nested curved pattern is a factor in our summation of gyroscopic effects, which gives inertia. And so if you take this inwardly sucking air and twist it in a tiny little circle so that it goes over and over and around and around like that, you've confined all this inwardly sucking ether into this one seemingly speck-sized thing, or if it's big as a galaxy, then galaxy-sized. And this itself has a summation of sucking in ether. It happens to have a little bit of a curl, that's why it's charged, and I'll say that why in a minute. But this curling net effect of ether being accelerated in is just like what I said on the surface of the Earth, which I drew somewhere right here under my nose, right here. This is the Earth. So this is a bad drawing. This should have been kind of put closer to the people, but I guess I could make that person tall, standing on the origin there. And so now you know what gravity is. It's gravity is the effect of pushing anything in the way. That's pretty clumsy. But that's what I'm going to say for now, because it is true. Right? It is the effect, right? It's the effect of it. Gravity. It's the effect of that. It's not that, it's the effect of that, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. You know, because it's kind of like a force. This is a force, and that the force is the effect of this phenomenon. Or the accelerator, the ether is accelerating, and it's making a force on something, and gravity is that force. What is that force? F equals ma. So the force is the mass times the acceleration. What's the mass? Well, there is no mass. It's all moving ether. But yeah, but that's right. But if you take one box filled with moving ether and you sum all the inertial movements up from r equals 0, so you'd have to integrate from r equals 0 to r equals r, whatever r is. Maybe r is the diameter of the box. The summation of all the wiggles, inertia. And you might have the inertias in terms of gyroscopic geometry. And then when you sum that all up, you get the inertia of everything in that box. So if you take that box and you just hold it in your hand, that box exerts a force on your hand when you hold it on top of the earth. And its mass is used in this equation here. Okay, that's enough. You know, I'm not really good at math or anything, so I just try to explain it real easily, okay? So that's what gravity is. And if you don't understand it, just tell me in the comments and I'll think about it and explain it in a completely different way, okay? Oh, and another thing I was going to say, you don't have to watch this part. This is for myself, when I watch this again and cringe. So, I was thinking that the problem with the models, they don't seem to know what they're talking about. When they build a vortex and they put a marble here and they roll it and it goes around and around and around and they say that's warped space-time, but they don't really, didn't explain it for me. I'll tell you how they really should have done it, and this is actually true. If you take a bunch of vortices like that, and then you put orange marbles in this one and you give them a push, you know, so that they go around, they flow like that, and then you put, what's another color? Green ones, no, that's not dark enough. Green ones over here, and they flow around and make fairy dust streamlines. And then you do dark blue balls, perfectly round balls, going here, and they make streamlines going around. That. So now, see, we've got something real here. This is fairy dust. I'll just title my painting Fairy Dust Flowing Into or Down or Along. How about through? How about with? With photon in. Let's just be bold here and say the 0 point field. Okay, the 0 point field is what flows through our photon. It's whatever dust is smaller than the photon, we include that in our model of our three-dimensional cube that has a certain density of nested wiggles that all have inertia. Because all wiggles are either spiral or sort of sucking in and moving in a curve. That gives an inertia. And, you know, if you think about it, even if you've got stuff going in opposite directions, it's still adding. The inertia is still adding, because it still means that it's hard to move it. Because once you go in a curve, you want to keep going that same direction, because you got momentum and you just want to keep going. That's why the photon just keeps on going fast. It has momentum. So that's the problem with this, is they only said one, and so you think maybe they're taking a flat surface and trying to explain it with the cone or something, but no, it actually flows just like that shape. If you were looking at it in a microscope, a really special microscope, and you could see inside of a photon, you'd see all the little wiggles and whorls of the 0-point field, and some of them might disappear pretty quick, but others ones might pop into existence, you know, inside as well. But they keep going, and then they just zip at the bottom. And as they do it, they suck in ether, and they have their own little, you know, gravity effect, you know, because if something's sitting out here, like something really, really small, and it sees this go by, it might just sort of flow towards it, because this ether around it, including it, sort of is pulled in. Because when anything goes inward, Big Brother feels it. You know, it's like God can feel everything, and so you can't get away with anything. If you decide you want to wiggle, you're going to suck in it in ether, and that is like part of the Akashic field, that moving in, and everything in the universe feels that, because it's like a fluid that just is, I guess it transmits the pulses, you could say, but it's always simultaneous. Why do I know this? You know, I guess I'm going to ask you to answer that for me. Why do we know that? Somehow we observe it, you know, that everything seems to be connected. And so I'm going to have to say that on this one, I'm going to just say that it is transmitted through space, but I can't explain how. I'm saying that that's what the model says, because everything is started out with as one fluid. It's still one fluid, it just happens to be moving. So if it's still one fluid and it's still God, and God feels everything and everything's connected and it's all consciousness, then it would have to be transmitted through space. That started out like that, and then it developed some curls. This is just a 2D view. And it developed, you know, more curls and more curls, you know, and on until just the fractally beautiful seeming chaos that we are. So you know, that would look pretty good if you could see what I was drawing. If you could see that this is actually a beautiful shape that I drew. It looks a bit scary, I guess. But if you could see that, because I'll color it so that you can see what I'm drawing, then you might not be cringing so much, because you don't know what I'm trying to draw, because it's not clear, you know? Like it's like a maze. If you color which part of the maze is the purple part, then you can see that it's this curve with little curves coming off of it. Kind of like hairs on a hair. I don't know. And this is this one. This one is the hat of the Grinch. And the very first one, which of course has to be bright, the young fellow, the eagle, pokes his head out of the great void. So, Just saying, if somebody finds my journal, I don't want them to think that I'm saying that. That is wrong. This is correct. You have to have infinite onion layers. Because see, this pattern of flow goes out forever and ever, and the pull out here is weaker and weaker, and it goes slower and slower. And the pull in here is stronger and stronger, and it goes faster and faster. And all the while it's forming a gravity field because of it sucking in the ether in an accelerated fashion. So accelerated ether makes you have a force on you if you have any inertia. Thank you so much for letting me tell you about gravity and how it's the effect of accelerating ether, pushing anything in the way, and how when the universe was created, it made tiny wiggles that sort of spread everywhere at infinitely fast time. And in a way, all the different changes in energy are quanta of local time. That's really the only way we have to measure time, is the infinitesimal clicks between things. So since it is continuous, I say it has to be continuous. Well, you know what? I'm optimistic that it's continuous. That means it's continuous, but it doesn't seem continuous because there's certain size scales that we can't get our instruments to view. So we think that it's made out of atoms and tiny little indivisible fundamental particles, but really everything has its own universe within it. And that's why it's infinitely small and infinitely big universes. So see, we'll never run out of space. And by the way, as you get smaller and smaller, as you go into here, your time seems to stay like the same and go on forever and ever, but to everyone else, you're going by real fast. Just thought I'd throw that in there. And thank you for letting me tell you about fairy dust and how it's a useful concept. The distribution of inertias, a distribution of sizes, a distribution of shapes and forms. And this is a mistake, and this is a fundamental world, the first fundamental expression of God when he woke up. You could call this painting the morning. That's it, just waking up. And then when all this stuff started happening, more of these forms, that would be called the morning after. Fairy dust flowing with photon. And then a bunch of these got together and crashed. And then they formed, as I told you before, what dolphins do when they have vortexes. They take a vortex and they take their little nose and they flip it around on itself and make bubble rings. So that's what our vortexes that came into existence do. They get, like a whole bunch of other vortexes are sort of in the way because there's so many in the Big Bang, and they crash each other, and some of them bend this tail into that head and they make toroids. So this is like mass, form of mass. Because why? It's inertia. Also, it allows for storing data. So you can't have data storage or memory without some form of mass to kind of count the buttons, count the numbers, because mass depends on logic and counting and quantities of inertia and stuff. At least it does to me. If you have mass, it must have a certain mass, right? It's just have to measure it somehow. And Same with photons. There's a certain amount of energy in those. So those both suck in etheric acceleration. These spread it out. These concentrate it. So these seem heavier than these, but they're really just as much sucking in the ether. And everything that gets sucked in is equally sucked out at infinite distances. Because you can't create energy. So anything inward has an equally outward flow. And that's all I'll say today about gravity. I think now I've shared with you what I think gravity is, and it doesn't seem too complicated to me. It seems actually quite easy to understand, especially if you watch ocean waters flow and maybe ridden a bicycle and played with the tire and noticed when it was turning it was kind of hard to flip, which is what keeps a bike up. If you're that kind of person and you're observant, the nerdy kid or whatever, like me, then yeah, you would. This would be real easy and just a good way to understand everything. And one way this helps me is it helps me understand like what the body is. It's just all this flowing ether that wiggles, and if you keep your body at the logos of our universe, then you won't require as much energy to feel good. And basically when you're in harmonics, when you're in that harmonic resonance with your local universe, you automatically feel bliss. And that's why it sustains, because it's a blissful feeling. And I wonder what that beep was. Probably just Big Brother. That's fine. So this is the song that I want to be in, and it just turns out that that's the frequency, so this is going to generate that frequency, and I'm going to put it where I hurt myself, and I'm going to heal it. It just makes the cells relax, and no chaotic sound waves or no chaotic electrical pulses, just perfection, and it can rest and rejuvenate, detox, and take in more nutrients and rebuild if it has to, and do its job, which is to hold the crayons. So I just took a photo. That can be the screenshot of this very exciting video. Thank you, everybody. Peace to you, and may this message reach your heart with bliss.